Okay, so this is the template that came with the Starburst pattern. You're supposed to make up 4 patches that are 2 of your colored fabrics and 2 background fabrics. You start with 3-inch squares, sew those together into a 4 patch, and then you lay this intersection here right in the middle of the 4 patch. So what I'm going to do is draw a couple of lines on this piece of paper, and I want to make sure that my lines are exactly perpendicular to each other, so a perfect 90-degree angle in the center, which is what you would have in the center of your 4 patch. And then I'm going to take this template and line the lines on the template exactly up with the lines I drew on the piece of paper. And then I'm just going to trace around the template. What I'm wanting to do is make pattern pieces for the shapes that actually go into making this block. So there is, that one line is not quite long enough, so just extend that out a little bit farther. So this is where the color fabric goes, and these pieces are background. And also I want to mark all of the edges that come together. Those are the edges that will need to get sewn together. So I'm just going to do kind of this wavy line on them so that I can keep those edges in my mind separate from these outside edges. And then I'm going to take some paper scissors and cut this out. Okay, so I have 4 pattern pieces, but these 2 are identical. They're just mirror images of each other. So I'm going to set one of those aside. Now, these have no seam allowance on them. We need to add seam allowance. Along all of these edges, the ones that are marked with these little bumpy bits, that's the part that comes together in the center of the template. All of those edges need to have 1/4 inch because that's what our seam allowance is. And the other edges, the ones which are unmarked, I'm going to add actually 1/2 inch seam allowance, just to make sure that I have enough. So what I did was lay those down on other pieces of paper. So here are my 2 colored pieces, here and here, and I have added actually I guess I added a little less on the outside, so I added 1/4 inch for the seam allowance on the inside edges that get sewn together, and I added less than that maybe like 1/8 of an inch to those. And then I also have this one, which is for the background fabric. So now I set about figuring out how to most efficiently get these pieces out of a charm pack and out of yardage. Because remember, the pattern says to start with the charm square, and which is 5 inches square, right? And you then cut it down to 3 inches square for making your 4-patch. Well, I thought, look at these pieces. I should be able to get at least one of each out of it. And so I laid them onto a charm square. And I'm looking at this and thinking, well, yeah, definitely I can get one of each out of it. Maybe I can actually get 2 of each out of it. So here I have a piece of paper that is exactly 5 inches square, just like the charm squares. And so I laid this guy down in the corner and just sketched the line, and then I put it in the other corner and sketched the line. Then I took my other piece and put it in this corner, sketched around it, put it here, and sketched around it. And I thought, great, in the original pattern, to make each blade of the Dresden plate, I would need to use 2 charm squares. Well, now I can get 2 blades out of a single charm square. That's actually 1/4 or 25% of the amount of fabric that the pattern originally called for. But I was looking at this and I was thinking, that's a little bit complicated to cut though. I want something that's going to be easier to manage than having to cut out around all these different parts. So what I figured out, basically these triangles here, you would just be, slicing a corner off of the charm square. So I laid this down on one of my bigger rulers. And I can take my triangle piece here and kind of lay it down. And then I used some masking tape and I marked the edges. And so I can just lay this down, line my charm square up with where the masking tape is, take my rotary cutter and slice, and then rotate, line it up again, and slice. Now, this funny part in the middle, this would be a lot of cuts if I want to cut these things precisely. But let's go back and look at our original pattern piece here. And it's this edge and this edge, which is the center. That's actually the corner of the charm square and the corner of the charm square here. So all of this stuff that's kind of out in this area, that's things that would get trimmed away when you're trimming with the template. So I don't actually have to cut that perfectly. I've already got these corners. That's the corners here on this piece. So what if I just fold it and cut it in half? So that's what I did with all of these guys. I just folded it in half And so now I have the pieces that I need for making 2 blades with the colored portions. So how do I get the background color? I determined that I needed to have squares that were 3 1/4 inches. And I actually have, I have a strip here. I think it's a little bit wider than 3 1/4 right now. Well, let's say 3 1/2. And I've got it folded over because I absolutely want to have mirror image ones. So let's cut this into a 3 1/2 inch square. Okay, so I've got 2 3 1/2 inch squares stacked on top of each other. And this was, you know, what I was playing with the template. So I can fit it on a 3 1/2 inch square twice. So what I'm going to do is lay it in the corner like that. And just kind of cut around the pattern piece. So there, I now have 4 of the pieces, and those 2 are mirror images of each other. These 2 are mirror images of each other. And now I can put the thing together. So this is where it gets maybe a little bit tricky. I did make a mistake when I was doing my first trial block with putting this together. But you can use your template as a guide to make sure that you're getting it right. So this is the biggest piece, and it's the biggest part of the block. So these guys kind of end up going point to point like that. And then the short side, it's the 90-degree angle that we want coming into the center. The short side lines up with the big block. The long side lines up with the triangle. So short side lining up with the biggest block and the long side lining up with the triangle. And so now this is kind of our forepatch that we need to sew together. So we're going to sew those 2 pieces together, and we're going to sew these 2 pieces together with a 1/4 inch seam, press to the dark side on both, and then once we've got them together, then we sew the 2 halves together, and your seam should butt together in the center. And once it's all sewn together and pressed, then you've got your sewn lines in the middle that you line your template up with. Then you just rotary cut around it and follow the pattern from that point forward. So you're only using 1/4 of the number of fat quarters that the pattern calls for. And instead of getting 1 blade per 2 3-inch squares, you're getting 1 blade per 3 1/2 inch square. So that's, I don't know, maybe a 40% reduction in the amount of fabric for the background. So that's somewhat of an improvement as well.